Welcome Internet to Psychoanalytic Talk, and today we're going to be talking about the extractive introjection by Christopher Bollas, as he defined it in the book The Shadow of the Object, Psychoanalysis of the Unthought Known. So this concept is very interesting in many regards, but first let's define it. For Christopher Bollas, the extractive introjection is this idea that when there's two individuals, A and B, A can, if he, for example, lacks psychic maturity, go within the psyche of B and plunder it, to take something out of it. So this is not just pure fantasy as it could be interpreted as such. It is for Bollas an interpersonal dynamic. So what he means by that is that the fact that when A, the person that's doing the extractive introjection, lacks something that deep down they are unable to use, to produce, to do something, they're gonna serve themselves, they're gonna take away something in B. So it seems very, very abstract, but how does it manifest? Well, very simply, it's when someone kind of like takes your ideas. For example, let's say you're having a conversation with someone, and someone starts taking your perspective, but it's not just they're agreeing, they really like taking it, they're owning it as if it was theirs and not yours. And often what Bollas states is that the subject, the person B, the person that's it's happening to, often feels lost at a lot of words, doesn't really know what they're talking about anymore because they feel unconsciously intruded, invaded, that their resources no longer are theirs, but that's of the other person, which creates a sense of confusion. Whereas the other person is very clear for them that basically they become in the other, as if it was a reversal, as if B had an identity and A at that moment did not. And A comes in and takes B's identity, becomes B, but not in this as if manifestation, but like elements. They extract the elements, and the introjection is that B is feeling empty because something is being taken out. A bit like, how can I say, if you have a painting on the wall for years and you then take it off, or it's robbed, it will be more the case in this fairy. If it's robbed, then you have the mark, you have the imprints of what's left, and there is a sense of absence, like there used to be something there, they used to. And this is this unconscious reaction. There used to be something, but now there is nothing. And that nothingness is something that the individual has to fill in as it's happening. And that's why it can create a moment where the individual that's victim of it is at a loss of words. It's like in French would say, il en a le souffle coupé, means the breath itself is taken away. And there's a bit of something like that, where something is taken away fundamentally. And the other one, the A, the one that's doing it, is living in a state of elation, which basically he feels reinforced because he's just plundered psychically someone else. He took off something of someone else and uses it as his own extension. Here we consider it's very interesting because Bollas basically creates a dynamic in which A and B become in the psyche of A an undifferentiated being, as if they had both psychically merged, and that merging creates an entity that in a way B does not recognize and does not recognize for themselves, but A understands how it works. And this form of dynamic is especially dangerous when a parent does extractive identification towards a child, as they're going to plunder the psychic resources of the child for their own purposes. So here I have to make this very clear that the individuals that do the extractive introjection are not necessarily consciously aware, like it's not necessarily a choice per se, but it's something that they have learned to do. I.e., it's or you project something into the other to manipulate them, or you take out something of the other that's valuable. Therefore, they can also, in a way, stabilize their envy by ripping out something of someone else and using it, as an envious child would rip off the toy of another. And the problem in this is that the child is going to feel emptied out, basically, by this extractive introjection, which is going to go on and on and on. In a way, they're not going to be able to separate from the parent, because the parent is always going to try and plunder and plunder and plunder. So for Bollas, what has to happen is that through psychotherapy and psychoanalysis, as Bollas is a psychoanalyst, one has to rebuild has been emptied out or stolen, to be able to recreate the resources that once were there and unexploited, that should have gone through a line of development in which a child becomes a full-fledged individual, becomes full of his psychic life, reality, fantasies, concepts, and so on and so forth, instead of an empty vessel which has been emptied out by the parent. Therefore, things have to be rebuilt. This can also happen, and Bollas notes it very interestingly, within the context of psychotherapy, meaning that, for example, the analyst can feel at certain points in his countertransference that the patient is taking something out of him, that in a way the patient is using the vocabulary, using the psychic metaphors, not as something that is an interpersonal relationship, an exchange in which both individuals are playing in a way the same game, but that something is like the cards of your hand are ripped away. And in those moments, the analyst might feel that they are unable to process, they are unable to give interpretations, they are unable to go forward with the patient, as the patient has taken something out of them. And it's often something I think that's very noticeable with people with pre-Oedipal structures, as I would say, i.e., for example, people with issues with very severe issues with narcissism, that in a way they are there to plunder, but not necessarily to exchange. That the other one is more of a tool than an object. So object being a human, right? Here I'm using the psychoanalytic vocabulary, and tool meaning just like basically an inanimate object that you can just use to your will. And there's nothing wrong in doing so. And having that experience is very uncanny, as you can no longer recognize yourself because something has been taken out. But at the moment when it's happening, you're confused. You don't really know. It's what has been taken out. What was even there to begin with? Why can't I think? Why am I so lost in thought? And those moments for Bollas are indicative of an extractive introjection, i.e., the person takes something and leaves nothing in its place, an emptiness that is felt. One of the best ways I can formulate it, if it still feels very abstract, as it's not anything easy to conceptualize, right? If you've seen Doctor Who, which is a show I personally love, there is an episode called Midnight, which I highly recommend. Even if you've never seen Doctor Who, this is a brilliant episode because it shows exactly that. There is a being that comes into and I'm going to spoil here, right? But there's a being that comes into the ship in which the Doctor and other humans are present. And the being steals the body of the passengers, but can only repeat what other people are saying. And at some point, somehow, it steals the voice of the Doctor, i.e., it speaks and the Doctor repeats. And this is exactly what extractive identification is. At least that's the metaphor I use in my mind. Something of a reversal in which you become the tool of someone else. You lose who you are, and the other person gains who you are to their advantage. What you think, what you feel, what is in your side, your being is transferred to them. In the transference here, in the plainest sense of like, they get you, literally, and you get nothing. Therefore, you're left empty. You're left as a shell in the relationship. And this is, of course, something that doesn't necessarily last too long if, it's let's say, in between two adults who have, or at least one adult that has a good ego structure. It doesn't last too long because the ego just comes back full force and reshapes what has been emptied out and can rebuild it. It's much more dramatic when it's a child, because the child can't really do that without the help of other adults that have to fulfill the needs of the child. So here we can see that it is a very displeasurable element, and often, at least I think as a therapist, we don't talk too much about those strange, uncanny feelings of feeling emptied, lost, and like taken one's breath away, and that's what is happening in extractive identification. And I think that Bollas, when I read the concept, really hit the nail on the head, that those very fine-tuned experiences are something that must be talked about, as often I think that extractive introjection is much more common than what we believe. Perhaps it's as common as projective identification, which is the other side of it. So projective identification, just to end on that note, would be more the fact of putting something that's not yours inside of someone else. For example, let's say I am angry and I want the other one to feel the fear that I can't face. If I'm going to project it into the other, and the other is going to receive it and identify with it. So that's the opposite. It's the opposite, because the extractive introjection is the fact of taking something out. Projective identification is the fact of putting something in, right? It might seem very technical, but there is a difference, and I think that we have to address the difference. Nevertheless, and this is where I'm going to conclude, extractive introjection is something of a brilliant concept, because it's basically it completes projective identification in a beautiful way and allows us to understand very bizarre feelings that often as clinicians we don't talk about, because we might feel that we are at fault, that we're too tired, too bothered by our own psychic reality or our own problems or our own issues, and feel that something is wrong with us, when it says something about the relationship itself. And that I find very interesting, and that's why I wanted to present it, because I think that ça gagne à être connu, as we would say in French, i.e. we all win if it gets a bit more famous as a concept, or it gets a little bit of spotlight, because it's a very interesting, very good concept to think about countertransference. Anyway, that's pretty much it for today. If you have any questions, you feel free to put them in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.